Shalom to the hopeful elect, to you so-called Negro, Latino, Native Americans, West Indians, and Haitians, you Hebrew Israelites. Gotta give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh Bahashim Yahweh Shai, the Most High, the Heavenly Father. His Hebrew name is Yahweh, not Yahweh, not Jehovah, not God, not Elohim, not Most High, not Lord, not Yah, not Jah, not Ahai, not Allah. It's Yahweh. And his only begotten son name in the Hebrew is Yahweh Shai, not Yahshua, not Yeshua, not Jesus Christos, not Jesus Christ, not Serapis Christos, not Yeshua, not Yehoshua. It's Yahweh Shai. So we got to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh Bahashim Yahweh Shai, Bahashim Rekah Kodash. Double honors to the apostles and elder bishops, nails of great millstone, who rule well, who teach well, who are the apostles, nails of all of Israel, ready concepted or not. In the sincere salutation to all the Akim pushing this truth and believing this truth, to let the four winds of the earth, the entire world, waking up the hopeful elect. And shalom to the Awal who are listening learning, you few sisters who are listening learning. I'm Isaiah from the Jim Masolano camp coming at you with another lesson, the true facts, faith, and edification. Another day of edification, Lord, wouldn't be edifying. So I titled this lesson, Conditioned Through Gradualism. I got some clips I'm going to play. How everything that's going on is conditioning our people, conditioning the world, but mainly because the Lord said that he made the world for Israel's sake. So the thing that's going on is to destroy 2/3 of our people. And that the hopeful elect see these things and understand that it's the work of the Lord. So let me get this first. Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Non-profit educational or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use. The things that's going on, this is the work of Yahweh Shema Shai, conditioning 2/3 of our people and the heathens to accept the MOTB, man. So, Lord wills be edifying. Check this one out. I'm sure these going to have infomercials, so bear with me.
Cause-effect relationships are by and large timeless. There is evolution. Evolution.
Salakia. Turn this volume down.
The cause-effect relationships are by and large timeless. There is evolution. Evolution is how something changes over a period of time. And then around those things are these cycles, because if they're put in the same position, let's say a Federal Reserve is put into a position of having to decide, do you have defaults or do you print money? There's a choice, and that choice repeats over history. And so you can see what are the indicators of that position and what are the reactions and what are the choices. So the cause-effect relationships, by and large, remain the same through history. But there's always a reason. We're changing the world order, okay? In 1945, we started the New World Order. What I mean is, throughout history, there's a fight for control because there's no world court that you go to and plead your case. And so there's a fight for power. So there's a war, and then the winners come out of that war, and the winners set the rules. And so 1945, the United States had 80% of the world's money. Gold was money at the time. It had half the world's GDP. It had a monopoly on military power. So the U.S. set the world order. That's why the United Nations is in New York. Washington, D.C. has the IMF and the World Bank. And its currency became the reserve currency because of that set of circumstances. Things evolve. Things change over history. So the three big things that are changing now that haven't occurred in our lifetime is the amount of debt and money creation, which affects the value of money, and you could see it affecting what's going on.
See, Babylon the Great sets the standard for everywhere, man. For the moment, anyway. The Lord set them up to set the standard for the entire planet through their policies, legislations, their democracy, their philosophy, their draconian measures. Okay, their constitutions. This is the doctrine of life, following the ways of Babylon the Great.
On every day. The large debt puts central bankers in a choice. In other words, that's when you have debt crises. So in all cases, they eventually print money, and that produces inflation. That's the place we are at this moment. The second is when there's a great internal conflict, usually when there's a large wealth and values gap, at the same time as you have a financial problem. Then you get populism of the left and populism of the right. In other words, those who feel disenfranchised want people who are going to fight for them. They don't want compromisers. They don't want them to be in the middle, because middle means that they're not fighting for them. They want them to have guts. So you have populists of the left, and their positions harden, and there are no compromises. That's why we're potentially in a situation that you could see in one of these elections, maybe in 2024, that neither side would accept losing. Perhaps we see that. Maybe you don't follow the rulings of the Supreme Court. Anyway, these things have not happened in our lifetime, but they happened many times in history. So if you look at that, you see from those patterns why the gaps become greater and the positions harden, and you see the dynamic. So that's the second. And the third is the rise of a great power to challenge the existing great power. In other words, I gave you the example of how the United States was so dominant in 1945. Now it's not as dominant. It is not dominant. In other words, China and the opposition is as strong as the United States and its allies. And so we have a conflict. And there are 5 kinds of wars, and they start in this order, just sequentially, typically. A trade war, a technology war, a geopolitical influence war. Then you get into a capital and economic warfare, which we are now with sanctions. They always happened in history. And then there's a military war. And so you can see that progression happen through time. I think that there's a tendency to look at the economy in a rear view mirror, seeing low levels of inflation, and also not understanding monetary inflation. There are 2 types of inflation. There's an inflation when the demand is pressing up against the ability to produce. So we had that kind of inflation. Unemployment rates go down and there's a limit to the capacity to produce. There's also a monetary inflation. And a monetary inflation means, very simply, if you produce more money and credit, if that increase is greater than the production of the goods and services, prices will go up. It creates a spiral, which we're seeing now. In other words, the selling of bonds. So it makes the imbalance become greater, because not only do you sell the bonds to pay for the deficit governments do, but holders of bonds choose to sell bonds because they're not producing a good real return. Now, that just mechanistically may be a little bit tricky for some people, but what that means is when you have a big supply-demand imbalance like that, either interest rates have got to go up to curtail that demand, or the central bank has to print more money, and they always print more money. So that dynamic of monetary inflation, the type of thing that makes the 70s, or the type of thing that makes inflationary depressions like happened in the Weimar Republic in Germany in the early 1920s, that kind of inflation I don't think is paid enough attention to. Inevitably, there's a certain amount of debt that has to be paid. And one man's debts are another man's assets. And the more debt you have, the bigger the problem is. And so when you have a lot of debt and you have to pay it back, you're either going to pay it back in hard money or you're going to pay it back in depreciated money. And that becomes the choice of the central bank. That's why you get stagflations. That's why we have an environment like we have now. You have economic weakness. You have a stagnant economy, low growth, and with high inflation. And that happens through this monetary situation that I'm describing, in which the central bank tries to deal with a middle course. In other words, what does the central bank want? Not too high inflation and not too low growth. And so when there's a lot of debt, because one man's debts are another man's assets, it becomes very difficult, a balancing act. And that is when you have stagflation, when you produce it. So just like in the 1960s, late 60s, we spent a lot of money on guns and butter, we called it, the Vietnam War, social programs, and so on. We wrote too many checks relative to the money we had in the bank, which was gold at the time. 1971, the devaluation. Then they print a lot of money into that stagflation. So stagflation is the middle course when there's 2 different groups. So think about it this way. How does he literally fight inflation? Because everybody says tight money policies. And how do you fight inflation? The way that happens is you get people to spend less by taking money and credit away from them. So he will reduce the amount of money and credit that's available. The Federal Reserve is going to sell $1.1 trillion of debt that it has, debt assets, bonds. And then they're going to raise interest rates. So they create a squeeze that reduces demand at the same time as people don't have enough money because inflation is high. The buying power is less. And then what that act is to reduce buying power again to reduce inflation, but it comes at a big cost. And that is stagflation. I want to explain inflation in a very simple way. There's a certain amount, quantity of buying, that is of how much money and credit you're given, divided by the amount of quantity of goods and services sold. In other words, if there's a lot more money and credit produced than there is goods and services produced, you will have an inflation, and the magnitude will be a function of that ratio. Over that period of time, there was a very enormous amount of money and credit that was produced, and there were some bottlenecks and shortages of production and disruption because of mostly of a combination of COVID and also geopolitical issues. So there was some effect. Most of the inflation came from the production. We attribute it. We can go down to actually calculate it. Most of that was due to the enormous increase in money and credit and spending that was produced. If you now look at the United States, it's no longer dominant militarily. It's no longer dominant economically because China has become comparable and is a larger trading partner with other countries than the United States is, the amount of trade and so on. It's a very unique power. Think about it. You can print the money that the world will accept. Now that means when they accept it, they buy your bonds, they buy your debt. That's what they hold these in, which are promises to receive this currency that you could print. So there are two things now that are jeopardizing that position. Dollar's now strong, but there are two things, we want to hold on to that position. Two things that threaten it. First is the printing and devaluing money, but all countries right now are doing it. So in all countries, currencies are depreciating against goods and services prices. And then the other issue, which is interesting, is the weaponization of the dollar in the form of sanctions. America is certainly in relative decline. In other words, has been. Education is not the same. Military power is not the same. Economic power is not the same. If we're looking at, how we're behaving with each other, it is not the same. This is the question. All currencies, usually during this period of time, depreciate together. So in the 1930s, all the currencies depreciate. They depreciated then against gold. They depreciate against assets, against real estate prices and a number of things. But we're coming into a new world in which the real question is what will be the new currency? And it may not be just a government currency. Is it crypto? Is it gold? Is it other things? And we'll find out. So a currency is a medium of exchange, and we'll have all of those currencies continue to be, including the dollar. But it's also a storehold of wealth. And that means that the bonds, or what you store it in, has to have a real return. And none of the major currencies have that. That's why you're seeing movements out of all of those and into other assets, and why you're seeing the bond market sell off. The production is now going based on ideological and political considerations. In other words, I talked about self-sufficiency. If you look at China will be self-sufficient. The United States will be self-sufficient. Multinational companies are going to worry about where they're going to have trade and so on. So the notion of how do I deal with self-sufficiency? We're in a world where ideological and political forces are allocating resources more than economic. Given the risks in the world, they want to be self-sufficient. And similarly, the United States wants to be more self-sufficient, and other countries are wanting to be more self-sufficient because they're worried about being cut off. It's the nature of the beast. Capitalism is a fabulous way of allocating resources to get rich, but it gets people at different rates. They get very big differences, and also produces a lot of debt. That's part of the capitalist process. And so when there's this large debt and when there's a large wealth gap, people feel disenfranchised. So it happened in Europe, 4 major democracies chose autocracies because of the fight between the left and the right. Then they called it fascism and communism. But those two, the right and the left, and how to deal with it has always happened. So you go back to the French Revolution. In all of those cases, there were moderates. There were people in the middle who said we have issues and we have to deal with those types of issues. But the polarity becomes greater. When the causes that people are behind are more important to them than the system is in jeopardy. You know how it is. How did Donald Trump get elected? What was the characteristics of the population? You can go back and you can see that. So you have fighters on both sides who are not
want to compromise.
They don't want, it's considered weak. And if you're in the middle, you will have to pick a side and fight. There's the loss of the middle. What we need right now, in my opinion, is a strong middle. You need a strong middle, but you also have a political system where you have two parties. And because of those two parties, there's a tendency to become more and more extreme because those extremities on each part of their party become stronger to win a nomination. Measures of extremism is that, roughly speaking, about 30% of the population is rather extreme of the right, and about 15% is extreme of the left. Of course, that represents then the majority of the Republican Party is in that category, and then a very important part of the Democratic Party is
on the left.
Yet the majority of Americans are in the middle. So you still have, given those numbers, they add up to maybe 40 or 45% of the population. But we don't have a party in the middle. You don't have a middle. Investing in education and infrastructure through history have been the most important ingredient. You can't make better investments than in education and infrastructure. They pay, and they produce a more broad-based prosperity. But we don't do that because of certain reasons, the Constitution and the like. But in order to do that, you need a platform of the middle. You need a spokesman, I think, that draws people away from the extremes toward the middle. If you did have a third political party, and I'm not saying that's practical, but I would say then you could have a platform, and then you could have somebody that you could look at, or candidates that say, I am for the middle, and that would help to neutralize. Because otherwise, history has shown you go to greater and greater extremism, and then you have the battle. And I think that that's what we should be afraid of most, is that those extremists in a battle having a type of civil war, which I think there's a reasonable chance of. When I say a civil war, I think that the rule of law and constitution can be of diminished value relative to power, such as in the elections, neither side accepting lose it, such as the Supreme Court makes rulings that are not followed by states, such as population moving from one state to another because the values in that other state are more there. And so then it becomes a make me type of situation. Rather than saying, what is the law? It says, make me do that thing. And now when we lose that kind of rule of law and respect for the whole, I think that's a type of civil war. When you watch that, who knows where that leads? It could lead to violence. You know, the whole idea in the Constitution of holding arms, you know, and how many, there are more arms than there are people, and so on. And when you get into a make me mentality, you could get into an armed situation where a lot of people and guns and crazy things. I'm not going that far, but I'm saying could. Let's bring that back a notch and talk about, can we imagine, you and I, we know history, and we look at today, and it's different. Could we see the failure of following the rule of law and the Constitution? So somebody gets elected, and you now know.
And that's called sedition, man. Tell you that in the second Ezra 15, how they're going to be sedition.
Who's going to be in the seat, or you don't follow that, and you get into a power-based situation. Yes, there's a possibility. And the fact that we consider that to be a significant possibility, I put the odds of something like that at about 40%. History has also shown, and we see it, that people have to pick a side. They pick a side and they speak to. So you watch in the media, do you get unbiased reporting? You know, it's hard to come by. Even exchanges of
Hey, it
thoughts.
said that
It
the
wasn't
people,
like this. Even the issue.
it said that the people should not regard their kings nor princes, man. It's gonna be lawlessness, which he just said, man. Just showing these where we headed at, man. Where Babylon the Great at, while Jacob's running around here enjoying their life, allegedly.
Let's say of Disney in Florida. In the past, each should have
See, these Edomites is focused on real serious things, man, because the world is collapsing, and they're trying to figure out some other strategy, man. Well, Jake ain't paying attention to none of this that's going on. Jake, like right here, Jake want to go to Disney World and Busch Gardens and Sea World and Aquatica and just enjoy life. Universal Studios, right? Halloween Horror Night and all this garbage, man. But these Edomites is talking about real live issues that's affecting Babylon the Great, man.
different perspective. You wouldn't weaponize, you wouldn't retaliate to the same extent that we're retaliating with exercises of power and so on. You have to benefit the majority of the people. It's narrowing just by any of the measures since 1980. Per capita income for the bottom 60% of the population has not risen. If you ask surveys, it's a failure. Every system needs to be improved and modified and made better. And I'm a mechanic, so I just look at the cause-effect relationship. It is because there is an element in which the reinvestment of gains do not go down to create the basics. What are the basics? Here's all you need: parents who take good care of you, a good public education system, and equal opportunity. That's all you need, as existed throughout.
And it's not neither one of those in Babylon the Great, man. Everything is upside down here because of who's in rulership.
History, you give those things to people, and by and large, you have a much more prosperous. You could draw the talent from wherever it is. So those are the things, and we're in a spiral because also the children who grow up in some of these areas from childhood, and they don't have the parents, they don't have the circumstances in terms of the basic equal education and so on. And that population is a growing population. And so we see then the disenfranchised. Other issues is because that population. So let's just go back. How did Donald Trump get elected as president? There was a population that was a disenfranchised population that wanted somebody who was going to fight for him, like populists do. The profit system alone is not good enough. The history of these situations make one worry about such things because the conflict and so on goes through a difficult time. I believe that we're at a moment in which we have a choice, and it largely depends on how we are with each other.
We being Americans.
Americans, and then we being, it could be Americans and Chinese, but we as humans have a choice of how we are going to be with each other. The world has more resources than it has ever had. It has more wealth than it has ever had. It has inventiveness that will produce fabulous gains, and that'll continue. But the issue is really, are we going to be dealing with that as a together society? It's very simple. Don't go to war with each other. Work together, right? Don't go to war. If you do that and you realize we're all in this together, and then I don't care how you get there in terms of that element. I do believe in thoughtful disagreement, of the art of thoughtful disagreement. I believe in win-win relationships, not lose-lose relationships. And my principle is, if you worry, you don't have to worry. And if you don't worry, you need to worry.
You need to worry.
Because if you worry, you will do the things that prevent you from happening the thing you're worrying about. So, for example, if I look at the term civil war, and I look at the term international war, and I can paint a picture, a realistic picture of what that looks like, so the people really see it, like the people who went through those wars in history saw it. If I can paint that picture and then say one thing we can agree on is we don't want that. Okay, we do not want that. So how? That's why I would like to see in the United States, I'd like to see us get strong. I'd like to see a strong middle. Anybody who has gone through a war, this is true for history, you see what happens is the polarity becomes so great that there's no talking. There's just mutual intimidation and there's a fight. And you get beyond the stage and the middle gets lost. There's the capacity, a lot of capacity to increase the size of the pie and divide it better. And I'm a capitalist. So I don't mean just handing out money wastefully, but I mean there's so many opportunities to improve productivity and produce opportunity in various ways that I just can't believe that we're not doing it, and we could do it.
You point out in the book that often a rising power and a declining power, where they cross, end up in a war. Do you believe China and the United States are going to end up in a war?
I believe that there's a significant risk of it, but I don't think it's probable. As I say, well, there are 5 types of wars. We're in 4 of them,
right,
and we're at the edge of a 5th.
Which is a shooting war.
That's right. So we are in a trade war, we are in a technology war, we are in a geopolitical influence war, and we are to some extent a capital and economic war. We are there. And we are dealing with military issues, particularly as they pertain to Taiwan. We're close.
Could Taiwan be the thing that led us to war?
If we go to a military war, it'll almost certainly be the Taiwan issue.
But what they don't understand is it had nothing to do with them, man. The Lord say World War III shall happen. It's just a matter of time. So let's get this. And before I start, let me read this real quick. In Revelation chapter 9 and verse 12, it reads, one woe is past, and behold, there come 2 woes more hereafter. Revelation 11:14. The second woe is past, and behold, the third woe cometh quickly. So it's going to happen. And he mentioned about he mentioned sedition, man. And it's going to happen. Sedition is going to happen, man. We was watching this movie. It's called Breakdown. This guy playing this VA veteran, and they cut off one of his checks or something. And I talk about this a lot, how these guys go fight for the military, and when they get back, man, I'm talking about Edomites, they don't get proper benefits, man. So a lot of these gonna go against the government, man. A lot of these guys, man, that was fighting for the wars, going on to serve they whatever years out, and then they get back and don't get treated right, man. A lot of these people, and there's most of them are Edomites, man, gonna revolt against the government.
Is Joe Biden's understanding of the U.S. economy. What 0 represents is Joe Biden's understanding of the U.S. economy, because he has no clue what's going on. You can't brag about the fact that we had one lone month where high prices didn't get any higher. It's not like they went down, they just didn't go up. But if people were struggling with high prices, their struggle didn't get any easier in July, it remained the same. What would have been good is if prices could have come down, but they didn't come down. And in fact, the only reason that the headline number didn't go up was because we finally got some relief at the pump. Gas prices came down, but a lot of other prices, food prices keep going up, rents keep going up. We are nowhere near done with this inflation problem. It is going to be here for years and years and years, probably the remainder of this decade, and probably then some, as they keep telling us, this is a very unique recession. In fact, most people don't even want to admit that we have one. But look at the recessions of the 1970s. You had rising prices there during stagflation, and that's what my forecast is. Remember, last year, I was predicting the U.S. economy would be in recession in the first half of 2022, and very few people had that right. But I also predicted that inflation wasn't transitory, that it would get stronger as the economy got weaker, and that is exactly what happened. Now, the reason that I believe that inflation is going to kick into a higher gear as this recession that we are in gets worse is because I believe Powell is going to pivot ultimately, and he is going to give up his fight against inflation in order to fight a different foe, either one that has already happened or one that is rapidly approaching. And so I think Powell is going to choose what he believes to be the lesser of the two evils. And I think he's going to pick fighting recession and propping up financial markets and monetizing government debt so the Treasury doesn't have to default. I think the Fed is going to pick that over inflation. And so unlike the pivot that we got with Volcker back in 1982, where Volcker pivoted.
Are you a low-income American on food stamps or Medicaid? If so, you are now eligible.
After a victory in his fight against inflation, is going to pivot despite defeat. Inflation is going to win. And so when we go back to 0% interest rates or whatever we do, and when we go to QE5, which is going to be launched, I don't think the Fed is going to shrink its balance sheet very much. It's going to shrink it less than it did last time it tried to do it, which is an impossible task given the bubble it's inflated. I think when the Fed goes back to stimulus and creating inflation, when inflation is maybe double or triple or quadruple that 2% target, the markets are going to react very differently than how they reacted in the past. Because in the past, the Fed was able to justify all this cheap money because they said we don't have enough inflation. We're still below target. Well, when they go back to the stimulus, when inflation is triple or more their target, the markets aren't going to buy it. And so I think all the inflation that they are going to have to create in order to stimulate the economy out of this recession is going to ignite a powder keg. We already have an inflation problem, and Powell's going to pour all this gasoline on it. And so we're going to see inflation moving up to a much higher level, even though it's already very high. In fact, it's probably double what the government claims in the CPI. If you want to know what's actually happening to prices, you've got to double what the government tells you, and that's more accurate. Meanwhile, labor force participation last month fell to 62.1. That is the low for the year. And in fact, over the last 4 months, even though we've created all these jobs, the number of people in the workforce has gone down. And so that means that all the jobs that were created over the last 4 months were people who already had a job getting another job. You know, Biden claimed that we have a record number of people in the workforce. He was mistaken. We had more people working 4 months ago than we have working now. The record high for the number of people working is before the pandemic. So even though we've recovered the jobs that we lost prior to the pandemic, it's only because the same people have multiple jobs. We haven't recovered the workers. We still have a lot of workers that were working prior to the pandemic that haven't rejoined the labor force. We can't have a soft landing because a soft landing means we avoid recession. So by that definition, we've already crashed, or it's a hard landing. It is what it is. And so you have all these Keynesians that somehow believe that inflation is caused by economic growth. They also think it's caused by too many people working. They think there's a trade-off between unemployment and inflation. They think if there's not enough people unemployed, you're going to have more inflation. And the way to get rid of inflation is to put people out of work. All of this is Keynesian nonsense. Inflation is not caused by the private sector. It's not caused by growth. It's not caused by people working. The only people working that cause inflation are the people at the Fed who are running the printing presses or pushing all the buttons that are creating all the money. That's where inflation comes from. And they create inflation in order to monetize U.S. government debt. So the federal government runs a big budget deficit. The Federal Reserve prints up money to buy those bonds, and that inflation enters the economy. It's got nothing to do with growth or people working. As a matter of fact, in a real economy, the stronger the growth, the lower prices. Because what is economic growth? It means increased output. It means more goods and services are being produced. Well, if you increase the supply of something, then you decrease the price. So a productive economy that's producing more stuff means that the price of that stuff is lower. The same thing with people working. If more people are employed productively, their productive output is increasing the supply of goods and services, keeping the prices down. If you slow down real economic growth, if you force people out of work, you're going to have less supply. We're not going to make as much stuff. We're not going to be offering as many services. And so therefore, the prices of those goods and services, all else being equal, are going to go up. Supply creates demand. So if people are producing and putting goods and services into the economy, well, now they have the ability to share in that production. They've earned money helping to create stuff, and now they can spend that money to buy the stuff that they created. And so the demand that comes from real production doesn't cause prices to go up. The only kind of demand that causes prices to go up is when the government just prints money and gives it to people. And so that money is not a function of production. People didn't earn that money producing. They just were sent the money by the government. I mean, that's what happened during COVID to a huge degree. You had people who had jobs and were working to help make stuff. They went home. They weren't working at all. They weren't making anything. But now the government sent them money. They weren't earning money because they worked. They were being paid not to work. But the worst part about it was many people were paid 2 or 3 times not to work than what they earned when they were working. So now these people who weren't working at all had all this money to go and buy stuff, but they didn't help produce any stuff. That's what pushed up prices, because you had all this fake demand and no supply. You see, the proper monetary policy response to the pandemic, if everybody was going to stop working, the Fed should have shrunk the money supply, not expanded it. The US government should have cut spending, not spent more. That would have balanced out supply and demand. But instead, we had the worst combination of monetary and fiscal policy probably in the history of the country. In the face of collapsing supply, we flooded the economy with phony demand. And so we're experiencing now, I think, just the beginning of those consequences. We've got a long way to go, which is why the idea that inflation has peaked is nonsense. Historically, whenever they brand a piece of legislation, whatever the name is, the effect will be the opposite of that name. So if a bill is called the Inflation Reduction Act, then you know right off the bat, the effect of the bill is going to be to increase inflation. And that's exactly what it's going to do. First of all, there's all this new government spending. That's more demand, artificial demand, coming into the economy. How is the government going to get all this money that it's going to spend? Because it's not going to get it from those tax hikes. It's ultimately going to get it from the Fed. The Fed is going to have to print more money to monetize those debts. Now, even if the Fed doesn't do that and the government has to find private buyers for those bonds, well, then it's going to crowd out investment in the private sector. And so that's going to mean fewer things are going to be produced because the private sector is going to have less money to invest in capital and things to improve productivity. And so that ultimately causes prices to be higher. So will the increase in corporate taxes, because to the extent that corporations have to pay higher taxes, it comes at the expense of lower investment. So if corporations have less money to invest in plant equipment and expanding supply, that ultimately puts upward pressure on prices. What the government needs to do to reduce inflation is reduce government spending. We need a bill that cuts government spending. The government is doing the opposite. They are increasing government spending. So what they're doing is they are throwing gasoline on a fire that's already burning hot. The government makes everything more expensive. It's the free market that makes things less expensive. So if we want to help put downward pressure.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me for today's talk. There's an urgent situation unfolding in America, and today I'll unveil all the unnerving details. So let's get started with a critical question. Where were you on March 9th, 2022, when President Biden signed the death warrant on American freedom? On that day, in a hush ceremony at the White House, without the approval of Congress, the states, or the American people, by 14067. Buried in his order are a few paragraphs titled Section 4. The language in Section 4 makes Order 14067 the most treacherous act by a sitting president in the history of our republic, because Section 4 sets the stage for legal government surveillance of all U.S. citizens, total control over your bank accounts and purchases, and the ability to silence all dissenting voices for good. In this new war on freedom, the Dems aren't coming for your guns. No, they're thinking much bigger than that. They're coming for your money, and it's already started. Hi, my name is Jim Rickards. I'm a former advisor to the Pentagon.
I played.
Downward pressure
I
on
did a lesson on that clip on that guy, man. These devils, hey, Esau is exposing it all, man, and it's all all this is leading. This is conditioning the mind, man, to accept everything that goes on, to conform to the ways of these devils, man. Everybody is being backed into a corner, man. You're either going to comply to these devils' system, or you're going to be left out, man. That's what this is leading to. You're either going to conform, comply to their system, or you're going to be left without. It's simple.
prices. We got to get government out and let the free market in. Now, in fact, they may be cutting interest rates before.
And like the precept the brother just put up, let me read this. It say Hosea 12:7 from Adam Nanah. He is a merchant. The balances of deceit are in his hand. He loveth to oppress. The balances of deceit are in his hand, man. We're dealing with this devil, man. But this is all, this is making the world conform, man. Everything that's going on is problem, reaction, solution, man. Agenda 21. Now it's Agenda 2030, man. Okay? And this is how they're conditioning people, man.
For the end of this year. But it's not going to be because they've won a victory over inflation. It's going to be because the economy is in a much more severe recession than the one it's in right now. In other words, this recession that's here is going to get worse, and that's going to force politicians to try to do something. You know, once the political pressure is greater because of unemployment and the economy, then the Fed is going to switch its attention from inflation. But the inflation problem is not going to go away. It's just that this other problem is going to loom larger in the eyes of the Fed. And I think what's driving the markets is this bad news on the economy is good news for the markets, because it means the Fed will pivot sooner. And before it pivots, it will raise rates less than it might have raised, absent the bad economic news. And again, you still have all of these Keynesians out there that think bad economic news is good news on inflation. They think the weak economy will weaken inflation. It won't. It is going to strengthen inflation, especially when the Federal Reserve and the government respond to the weakening economy with more stimulus, because that stimulus is inflation. So they're going to start creating more inflation, even though we already have too much inflation. And so the problem is going to get much bigger than the markets understand. I still think this is an overall bear market. I think that rate hikes are going to continue to take their toll, but so will inflation. I think inflation is going to harm a lot of companies that have a problem dealing with it. I think a lot of demand is going to be destroyed for a lot of discretionary items, because people are going to spend all their money on food, on energy, on insurance, on rent, on taxes. Well, I think the nature of this financial crisis is going to be a lot different than the one we had in 2008, because I don't think the Fed is going to allow it. That's one of the reasons I believe that Powell is going to pivot, because if the Fed does keep raising rates, we will have a financial crisis that looks like 2008, only much worse, because 2008 was about bad debt. It was about people borrowed money and they couldn't pay it back. And the collateral for the loans was no good because it was real estate and prices went down. Well, we have much more debt now than we had in 2008. I mean, by an order of magnitude. Everybody has more debt than they had back then. And so this is going to be a much bigger crisis when the defaults start. And all those banks that were too big to fail, that were bailed out in 2008, they're a lot bigger now. And when they fail, it's going to be a lot worse, except with inflation too high and the Fed fighting inflation, there are no bailouts. There's no TARP 2.0. All these banks are going to have to be allowed to fail. And that means customers are going to lose money, not just stockholders or bondholders. The customers are going to lose money because the FDIC doesn't.
Have you heard of Executive Order 14067? Most people probably haven't, but it could completely upend American life. You see, Section 4 of this order is set to completely overhaul our entire financial system, replacing our cash currency with a new programmable digital token. This would mean that all of your purchases, donations, income, and more could be tracked. Your accounts could be turned on or off outside of your control. In fact, I believe soon your physical dollars will be confiscated or will simply be worthless paper. This is without a doubt the most alarming development I've seen in my entire career, and I've seen a lot. My name is Jim Rickards. I've been an advisor to the Pentagon, the White House, Congress, the CIA, and the Department of Defense. I'm also an attorney, investment banker, and author of 7 books on currencies and international economics. When places like Fox, CNBC, or Bloomberg want to know what's about to shake up the global economy, they call me. Most of all, like you, I'm a proud American patriot. This disturbing prediction is based on my independent research and my contacts in the intelligence community. The good news is there are ways you can protect yourself and your savings from falling under the control of Washington elites. But you'll have to act fast because once fully implemented, it could be too late. And U.S. trials are already well underway. I believe we could start seeing these digital dollars in circulation soon. That's why I put together a presentation on the actions I think every American should take before that happens. It's free to watch, but I can't promise how much longer it will be available. So please click the button below to view it now.
You see,
Doesn't have any money.
he's an insider, man. He's an insider, man. And then they tell you the only option you have is to conform to the new system, man. You don't got no option. And they show you do you not think he's an insider, man? If he got so much to say to go against the government, why is he still living? Why they ain't put him to death? Because he's an insider, man. He is used to make the world just go ahead and conform to the ways of the new system, man. And look what the Lord doing in Puerto Rico. Blackout in Puerto Rico. Whole island loses power. And I watched the news this morning. It said this is the 5-year anniversary of when Marie hit that place, man. The Lord, man, listen, man. When these devils got Jake complying to the system, man, 2/3 is gonna be destroyed, man. But the hopeful elect ain't going for this, man. But this is brainwashing. This is brainwashing, man. All these things that's going on, and there's so much going on, you can't keep up, man. And you can't watch every brother video that's going into these prophecies, man. There's so much going on, man. What the Lord say in Habakkuk 1:5, let me read this. There's so much going on, man. Behold ye among the heathen, and regard, and wonder marvelously. For I will work a work in your days which you will not believe, though it be told to you. There's a lot going on, man. And everything that's going on, it gotta lead, it's leading to the MOTB, man. You gotta conform to the new system. Ain't no if and none of that, man. You're either gonna conform or you're gonna be left out, man. Just like in the movie Demolition Man. You're either gonna be on top of the ground with MOTB, okay, or you're gonna be blacklisted, okay, trying to find food, man. Which they don't even understand. The Lord said He's gonna feed the hopeful elect, man.
Unless it gets it from the Fed. And the Fed isn't going to be giving out money if it's fighting inflation, it's taking away money. So I believe the Fed is going to pivot to prevent that massive financial crisis. And so what we're going to get
See, all these people, man, they bring out good information. This guy right here, Peter Schiff, Ron Paul, Gerald Salente, Jeremy Bay, Richard Wolf. They bring out a lot of information, man. But they insiders, man. Putting people in fear of what to do. What should I do? Oh man, what should I do? This is what they're doing. The government is promoting fear, man. These are fear tactics, man, to scare you in conforming and complying to the system, man. And they using these guys, Peter Schiff, Richard Wolf, Jeremy Bay, Gerald Salente, Richard, all these guys, man, Ron Paul. They using these guys, man. They insiders, man. Okay, they insiders, man. Don't be no fool, man.
A sovereign debt crisis and a US dollar crisis. So it's going to take the form of a crashing dollar. And so the people who are going to lose money are not the people that are just holding subprime mortgages, but the people who are holding US Treasury bonds or any bonds denominated in US dollars, or even people that have US dollars stuffed under their mattress. You know, the dollar has risen so far in the early stages of this big inflation because investors are still delusional about the Fed's ability to contain inflation and bring it back down to 2%. When they wake up to reality that inflation is going to be way above 2% indefinitely, then the dollar is going to fall through the floor. and then things like gold and silver will go through the roof. Remember, in 1971, the U.S. defaulted on its obligations because Nixon took us off the gold standard. But prior to that, if you owned a Federal Reserve note and you were a foreign central bank, you owned an obligation of the United States government to pay you gold. Federal Reserve notes were notes for gold, and the U.S. government defaulted on those notes. We told all of our international creditors, we promised to pay you gold. If you had $35, we promised you an ounce of gold. And they did a couple of devaluations first, but that wasn't enough. And then Nixon said, you know what? We're going to default completely. We're going to give you no note gold for your notes. We're going to pay nothing. So that was an official default. And then gold went from $35 an ounce up to $850. So people who had U.S. Federal Reserve notes thought they were going to get a certain amount of gold. They ended up getting a fraction of that gold because the value of the dollar imploded relative to gold because we defaulted on that promise. And I think it's going to lose its status as the reserve currency. And that is going to be a game changer for the U.S. economy because we rely on the ability to exchange the paper we print, U.S. Federal Reserve notes, dollars, for the goods the rest of the world produces. We don't have to produce goods in exchange. And that's been the free ride that we've had on this global gravy train. And that's going to come to an end. And that's going to have profound implications for the U.S. economy and the standard of living of America.
I just want to show, I'm showing these, man, because these are the conditions, man. This is conditioned through gradualism, man. They want people, they want us to be in fear, man. In fear. This is fear tactics. Even though we know the scriptures tell you that famine is going to happen, pestilence, MOTB going to happen, World War III going to happen. But these devils is trying to make Jake comply, man, through fear, man, to accept the MOTB.
America's economic landscape is rapidly changing. In recent years, hundreds of thousands of stores were permanently shut down. And as we enter a new economic downturn, many more are likely to close their doors for good. Conditions for business owners are getting increasingly difficult as the compounding effects of inflation, supply chain challenges, and slower consumer spending continues to compromise their sales and profits month after month. New data suggests that pessimism in the retail sector is growing all across the board, and even big companies are struggling to stay afloat right now. Many of the most iconic American retailers have closed thousands of stores and filed for bankruptcy as they have failed to keep up with their competitors. The rise of online retailers made many brick-and-mortar stores seem redundant. Even though companies tend to think that they have something unique to offer their customers, the reality is that not enough of them actually do. Some, in fact, lose touch with what shoppers truly want and need for such a long time that when they realize there's no turning back or quick fix, they have no choice but to go out of business. In this video, we've listed a series of stores that are suffering from a lack of customers, a lack of money, a lack of viable prospects, or a combination of all of those issues. Many of them have already shuttered dozens or even hundreds of locations all across the nation, or are in the process of closing down in 2022. Soon, they may disappear from our commercial scene altogether, and we might never get the chance to shop at these stores ever again. Before checking this list, please support us with a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our next list. Without further ado, here are 15 big stores that will probably disappear soon. 1. Sears. Sears' annual revenues have been steadily falling for almost 15 years. There used to be thousands of Sears stores in the U.S. in the early 2000s, but now there are only 25 stores left. However, in May, the company announced that it's going to close 7 more locations this year. Sears filed for bankruptcy in October 2018 and still hasn't been able to become more profitable and turn things around. In fact, data shows that the company hasn't turned a full year profit since 2011, and same-store sales have fallen for 10 consecutive years. After filing for bankruptcy, Susquehanna analyst Bill Dreher noted that the move was only delaying the brand's inevitable end. Sears' operational performance is clearly not improving, and we grow increasingly concerned whether the company will ever return to profitability. Further highlighting the company's weakened position is the reality that manufacturers are
Warning! If you have land you need to sell quickly, stop! Don't waste another minute of
are increasingly demanding tighter payment and/or withholding products, he wrote. At the current pace of closures, we might not have any Sears stores left in the country by mid-2023. 2. Barnes & Noble. The famous bookstore chain crashed after the pandemic, filing for bankruptcy in March 2021. Although it has been recently purchased by the British group Elliott Advisors Limited, the rise of e-books and online booksellers continues to threaten the future of the book retailer. Over the past 2 years, the company saw a 50% decline in revenue, according to the New York Times. Late last year, it announced the closure of 197 out of its remaining 600 stores. Scott Amix revealed that Barnes & Noble is suffering a $10 million yearly loss in overall sales. He said the book chain is hemorrhaging cash flow. As consumer trends continue to accelerate towards technology, losses will likely get bigger and bigger for Barnes & Noble, and at some point, conditions will become unsustainable for this beloved bookstore chain. 3. Rue 21. Since 2017, the privately owned teen retailer has been overburdened with debt. Executives acknowledged that the company didn't keep up with the evolution of consumer tastes and filed for Chapter 11 to renegotiate its debt. From that point on, the retailer lost about 420 stores, or more than a third of its brick-and-mortar footprint. Unfortunately, fewer stores mean a smaller scale in a low-margin industry that requires scale. In other words, they're hanging by a thread. 4. Belk. The southeastern department store Belk went through the entire bankruptcy process in 2021, shedding about $450 million in debt. Although it has been saved by a group of investors for the time being, the future of the store chain is far from secure. Moody's Analytics data shows that the company has a very poor credit rating and a negative earnings outlook for 2022. That is to say, Belk is still at risk of facing more financial difficulties. And considering that it's still reliant on its brick-and-mortar operations and lacks an e-commerce foothold, it could be in for a rough 2023 as it fails to keep up with its bigger competitors. 5. J.C. Penney. Another legacy brand that might end up on the chopping block. J.C. Penney. Things were pretty bad for the company even before the burst of the health crisis, but lockdowns and stay-at-home mandates had a devastating effect on the retail sector, and some argue that the pandemic was the last nail in the coffin for the company. JCPenney had already had its share of tumultuousness, highlighted C Street principal at C Street Creative. With about 600 physical stores left standing and a primary, older demographic who does not tend to use e-commerce as much, there could be trouble for their ability to survive 2022 and beyond. In October 2021, it announced the closure of 242 stores, and many more can occur as it goes through a bumpy merger this year. 6. Gap. According to the financial blogger Stacey Caprio, one popular brand that could disappear in 2022 is Gap. They weren't turning a profit last year in their public balance sheets, and their revenue is based heavily on retail store visits and retail store sales, both of which have taken a sharp downturn due to COVID lockdown policies this past few years. To stay in business for a long time, they will have to innovate and focus more on online than retail, so they can weather unexpected storms, such as the one that happened in 2021, she wrote.
The cost of living going up. The checks you know, staying the same. Nobody's getting the best time this world gonna get people to come out and spend money is on Black Friday, man. Right? Black Friday. What's the other day? Um, you got Black Friday. And it's another day where Jake go out and spend money. That's the best time, man. This place, people is man. America is messed up, man. People are losing jobs. They ain't eating. The cost of living going up and the check still the same, man. Hey, the Lord is destroying this place, man.
In April, Gap was facing a $2.25 billion debt load, which led the company to warn that it could run out of money in the next 12 months. The casual clothing retailer also announced the suspension of rent payments for all its remaining stores, adding another $115 million to its debt burden. Needless to say, that's a perfect recipe for disaster. We soon may see the last of Gap. 7. Abercrombie & Fitch. The teen targeting clothier has been struggling for years as expensive labels fell out of fashion, and more recently, fending off the impact of some controversial comments made by now former CEO Michael Jeffries. It first filed for bankruptcy in 2008, and in recent years, it has seen its profit margin dramatically shrink. As far as retail footprint goes, the company has been continuously retreating. In 2020, Abercrombie & Fitch shuttered 137 store locations. During its last earnings call, it indicated that it would close as many as 60 U.S. stores in the next few months. Deutsche Bank analyst Tiffany Kananga is bearish about the future of the company. We're highly skeptical of Abercrombie's ability to stabilize its gross profit margin against this competitive online retail backdrop, she wrote.
If you're 35 to 45 years old in the United States without life insurance, do not.
Another scam.
8. GNC. In 2020, vitamin and dietary supplement chain GNC filed for Chapter 11 and announced the shutdown of 1,400 stores. In statements posted on its website, GNC said the business had been under financial pressure for the past several years, but the repercussions of the health crisis created a situation where we were unable to accomplish our refinancing, and the abrupt change in the operating environment had a dramatic negative impact on our business. Industry insiders argue that as the internet opened the door to a flood of competitors that offered more and cheaper choices, GNC stores have become increasingly obsolete. Other locations ultimately could be added to the store closing list, given that the company is still scrambling to implement its new restructuring plan. 9. Charlotte Russe. Another retailer that could disappear, or at least significantly fade away in 22, is Charlotte Russe, said Paul Z. Shelton Jr., MSF founder and chief investment officer of Warwick Shore Advisors. Founded in 1975, the retailer has stamped its presence on clothing, shoes, and accessories, targeting women in their teens and 20s. The company currently operates stores in 45 states, with the majority inside large shopping malls. Consumer traffic in these locations is significantly lower, painting a negative picture for the retailer. Unfortunately, I don't believe that consumer preference will shift in favor of Charlotte Russe, the expert added. Even before the U.S. economy started to head towards a recession, the company filed for bankruptcy and announced it would close 100 stores and sell its intellectual property. Given the current economic outlook, things may soon take a turn for the worse for Charlotte Russe. 10. Staples and Office Depot. The problem that office supply stores will face is that one does not need to see an item in person to buy it, says Jesse Harrison, CEO of Employee Justice Legal Team. If you need a stapler, you know what you need, and you can buy it online. Everyone knows what paper looks like, You don't need to go to the store to check it out. You don't need to try it on. Office supply stores like Staples and Office Depot are likely to close in the next few years, he predicts. Since December 2019, Office Depot stocks have been in consistent decline. Over the past 2 years, 190 Staples and Office Depot stores were shuttered in the U.S. In 2015, there were 2,600 stores in operation, but now there's only about 1,100 locations still running across the country, a trend that truly highlights the rapid demise of the retailer. 11. True Religion Apparel. Just like defunct The Limited, as well as Aeropostale, Bon Ton, and Pacific Sunwear, youth-oriented retailer True Religion Apparel belongs to a list of retailers that may be beyond salvaging. It first filed for Chapter 11 in 2017, having pared its total debt to roughly one-fourth of its pre-bankruptcy levels. In 2020, the company filed for bankruptcy for a second time, with the pandemic resulting in the permanent closure of over 140 stores all across the nation. Now, there are only 44 True Religion stores left, but their time may be counted. With the rise of independent fashion brands on the internet, the era of spending hundreds of dollars on a pair of off-the-rack jeans seems to be over. 12. AMC. AMC is still the largest theater chain in America, but as streaming services become more and more popular, keeping its 620 locations spread across the country will be increasingly difficult. Even though the company saw its share price skyrocket as it became a meme stock in a historic gamma squeeze led by retail investors, its financial conditions have not improved enough to justify the size of its brick-and-mortar presence. Last year, the cinema chain warned it could run out of cash and that it would have to file for bankruptcy if it did not obtain liquidity. Right after that, AMC went on to raise $104 million after selling some $38 million of $200 million in shares. But it still remains strapped for cash. And in December, it announced that it planned to raise an additional $125 million by selling 50 million shares. In total, AMC managed to raise $204 million. But as of early January, CEO Adam Aron said that the company needed $750 million to actually be able to survive. That's a huge sum, even for companies with great performances, which, by the way, is not the case with AMC. 13.
This is Malachi 1 and 4. Whereas Edom said, "We are impoverished, but we will return and build the desolate places. Thus saith the Lord, Yahweh of hosts, they shall build, but I will throw down, and they shall call them the board of wickedness, and the people against whom the Lord hath indignation forever." Hey, the Lord is throwing this place down, man. Come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Obadiah 1 and 3. The pride of thy heart have deceived thee, thou that dwellest in the cliffs of the rock, whose habitation is high, that saith in his heart, who shall bring me down to the ground? Hey, the Lord is throwing Babylon down, man.
Alex and Ani. Jewelry chain Alex and Ani filed for Chapter 11 late last year. Just like most retailers, the company has been hurt by the pandemic and has seen declining foot traffic in all of its physical stores. That has fueled the shutdown of a third of its locations. But that was not the worst part of the story. Bank of America has recently sued the company, claiming that Alex and Ani defaulted on a $50 million.
Telling you, between now and April, no later than May of next year, there's going to be the biggest housing opportunity.
$1 million credit facility. The legal squabble resulted in millions of dollars more in legal fees for the stressed retailer, and it might have put it one step closer to the edge. 14. Party City. Launched in 1990, Party City was the ultimate last-minute go-to for special occasion staples, be they paper plates or jumbo balloons. But now it seems like the party is close to an end. In the new normal, we cannot celebrate as we usually do, explained Antonio Wells, naming not a brand growth and strategy marketing agency based in Chicago. Birthdays, festive holidays, graduations, weddings, and even Party City's biggest day of the year, Halloween, have all been canceled. Since the pandemic has killed most normal public gatherings, it has dampened those few celebrations that do happen. This reduced sales volume is not enough to sustain a retail franchise whose revenue derives from seasonal sales. But the company has been on its last legs way before the health crisis changed life as we know it. In 2019, the retailer closed 45 stores due to shortages of key products. It goes without saying that the myriad of supply chain disruptions we're witnessing right now means more trouble for the Party City. 15. Kmart, the discount store chain which peaked at 2,400 stores in the early 1990s, has failed to modernize its stores, and larger competitors such as Walmart and Target took away much of its market share. Today, there are only 3 open Kmart stores in the U.S., as the company has faced a brutal process of almost complete liquidation. Both Sears and Kmart were owned by Sears Holdings, which first filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in 2018, narrowly escaping liquidation in early 2019, just to be caught off guard by nationwide lockdowns in 2020 and to see sales going free fall. Both chains were sold to their longtime investor and CEO, Eddie Lampert, who has kept them alive on a shoestring budget under the company name Transform Co. Together, Sears and Kmart have shut down more than 3,500 stores and cut about 250,000 jobs in the past 15 years. The disappearance of so many big stores is a major signal of economic weakness. The phenomenon known as the retail apocalypse is nothing more than a reflection of a shrinking middle class that's been too overburdened with debt and soaring living expenses. Middle-income earners have also lost so much purchasing power that they're left with too much little money to spend on other goods after paying their bills at the end of each month.
Right.
More and more, middle-class Americans are turning to discount stores because they can't afford to shop at brand-name stores anymore. The shift in consumer habits towards online shopping has also been the impending doom for brick-and-mortar stores. Not only that, e-commerce is much more competitive in terms of price and promotions, and you can purchase whatever you want with only a click. Hundreds of thousands of businesses have been closed in the past 5 years, and according to UBS data, 80,000 more might be gone by 2026. The shutdown of each of these locations means that dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of jobs are going to be lost at a time too. America's economic landscape is looking gloomier and emptier.
2026, man. I hope we ain't here to no 2026, man.
How can we live the American dream when the deck is stacked against us? For decades, our politicians stood idly by as millions of good-paying jobs were shipped overseas. Our economic infrastructure was completely dismantled and multitude of businesses were choked to death, leaving our population mostly with low-paid positions, a shrinking purchasing power, and rising living expenses. Today, we are definitely reaping the consequences. According to a new survey, almost 1 in 2 Americans are struggling financially right now, which means that about half the country is flat broke. And things are set to get even more precarious for working families as we enter the last few months of the year. That's what we're going to expose in this video. But before moving on, we would really appreciate it if you supported our work by leaving a thumbs up and subscribing to our channel to keep up to date with the most important news. Working families in America are being destroyed by this crazy economy. Households are getting squeezed by a giant pile of expensive bills that only get higher and higher, and wages are not keeping pace with rising prices. People are seeing the value of their money go down, while the cost of living continues to go up. That is why the levels of economic suffering are simply off the charts at this point, with almost 1 in 2 Americans saying that they're having major difficulties making ends meet financially amid soaring food and gas bills. New research from Monmouth University shows more than 42% of the nation's workers admitted that they are under financial pressure, pointing to inflation as their biggest concern, the survey found. The figure is the highest recorded by the university since it started polling people 5 years ago.
I was watching the Elder Yashwama video last night, and he mentioned in the video on one of the news clips that this husband and wife, it said the top families complaining about the money, about not having enough, and they were saying how the dude, the husband and the wife was complaining about what was going in the cart and what wasn't, man. What was going into the shopping cart and what wasn't. Because everybody used to just go into the store and everybody throw in the cart what they wanted. If you had kids with you, husband and wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, you would just throw in the cart whatever because it was good. Now it's at the point now, hey, if it's not necessary, we ain't getting it. And this from top families, man.
All over the country, we're being forced to endure some of the highest utility and grocery bills on record as the Ukraine crisis and Western sanctions continue to impact global
And
commodities.
as we always say, man, hey, it's ones that you see every day that's riding good in these Challengers and Chargers and Camaros and BMWs and Lexuses, and they stand in nice little houses. Hey, they got it worse than you, man. And I'm talking about us over here that's in the, I'm talking about the hopeful elect, man, that's in this true circle, man. They got it worse than we do, man. Because remember, at the end of the day, we got hope, man. We got Yahweh Shema Shah, and they don't, man. So why you think they living good and they doing good? Guess what? They got problems too, man. Most of the people that you see riding good, they in debt, man. They in debt, man. Credit cards up to their throat, man.
Supplies and push up prices. Extreme weather is also hitting our domestic food production, and supply chain disruptions are still causing delays, shortages, and increased costs. Simultaneously, rent prices are seeing double-digit increases in many places, and housing costs continue to jump at their fastest pace in decades. In June, inflation escalated at the sharpest pace in more than 40 years, with the consumer price index increasing by 9.1%, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. That month, gas prices also hit fresh highs above $5 per gallon. At the same time, over half.
Everything about energy is changing. New discoveries, new technology.
Half the nation, or 51% of all American workers, make less than $30,000 a year. With so many expenses adding up and so little money, most people don't have a financial safety net to rely on. In fact, a new YouGov survey says that 49% of all Americans could not afford an unexpected $400 emergency expense without borrowing the money from somewhere or selling something. Considering all of these factors, there's no wonder why so many hard-working families are facing such great financial hardship. Economic concerns tend to rise to the top of the list of family concerns, as you might expect. But the singular impact of inflation is really hitting home right now. Most Americans are blaming Washington for their current pain, explained Patrick Murray, director of the independent Monmouth University Polling Institute. The federal government is failing to control soaring inflation, and Americans are growing increasingly dissatisfied, the research highlighted, with 57% admitting that governmental actions in recent months had harmed their families. Their struggle is real, but the plight of working families is not something that is new. The economic strength of American workers has been declining for decades. During the 1950s and 1960s, wages and salaries earned by workers accounted for nearly half of all gross domestic income. By the 1970s, things started to go off the rails, and now we have just hit an all-time low. That is to say, the share of the wealth of American working families just keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller. For at least 4 consecutive decades, median incomes have been falling all across the United States. This is adding an incredible amount of financial stress on the shoulders of many households. And from coast to coast, we have seen poverty grow explosively in the United States over the last 5 years. Pew Research data reveals that median incomes have been steadily dropping since the start of this century. A major new analysis of income in the U.S. found that more than 80% of the country's 229 metropolitan areas have seen real inflation-adjusted incomes fall steadily since the year 2000. Some of the steepest declines in median incomes have been seen in cities hit by industrial decline. For example, a 27% drop in Springfield, Ohio, and 18% in the conurbation that includes Detroit. But, ominously, even fast-expanding success stories have seen incomes falling, researchers noted. For instance, the area around Denver, Colorado, has seen its population grow by 600,000 people since 1999, but its median income has fallen from $83,500 to less than $41,000. Similarly, in Raleigh, North Carolina, a fast-growing city buoyed by a cluster of research universities and biotech firms, the population has increased by almost 20% this century, yet its middle class has shrunk from 55% of the population to 46%. Median incomes have fallen by more than $85,000 to less than $38,000, new findings show. On the flip side, U.S. workers continue to report that the rising cost of basic necessities is impacting their family's lifestyle, with almost half, or 48%, noting a steady decline in their living standards. Despite working harder than ever, Americans' sense of financial security is diminishing. Given that we have to spend a larger share of our salaries each month, it's getting harder to save money and build a financial cushion to fall back on. Having emergency savings is key to avoiding taking on more debt. But unfortunately, roughly 40% of consumers cannot put any money at all into savings, according to a recent analysis of household financial health and readiness by the American Consumer Credit Counseling, while about 19% said they had to reduce their savings rate. This has led to a 43% increase in the levels of consumer debt in August, according to a separate study by LendingTree. Most people will rely on credit card debt to bridge the gap between what they need and what they can afford, the report stressed. Already, the rise in borrowing together with auto loans, student debt, and mortgages propelled total household debt to a record $15.84 trillion in the first quarter. Such elevated amounts of debt are detrimental to our financial health. As a matter of fact, in the past 12 months, the number of banking customers who consider themselves financially healthy has plummeted, an indication that this crazy economy is damaging most people's economic well-being. Americans' overall satisfaction with their financial condition now stands at a 12-month low, while those who classify themselves as financially unhealthy is as high as 64%, J.D. Power researchers noted.
This is the craziest way to retrieve lost files. It's the Ultra Recovery Converter from Zilke. It connects to
That drop in overall financial health is largely due to borrowing more and saving less, with fewer safety nets in place, including emergency funds and insurance coverage, and the impact that has on their credit worthiness, the report added. Once upon a time, we lived in a country where working families had actual opportunities to thrive economically. Lamentably, that era is long gone, and economic opportunity seems increasingly out of reach for most people. As you could probably tell by now, in today's video, we're bringing in the numbers, the hard data, the facts, statistics, and pieces of evidence that reflect the reality our leaders continue to deny. They want to make it seem that everything is fine when everything is not. Official numbers do not tell us the whole truth. But pessimism keeps growing all over the U.S. because people can see it, they can feel it, and they can experience the devastating effects of an economy that is falling apart. They can tell that they no longer have the opportunities other generations had. We have evidence to prove so. The third edition of McKinsey's American Opportunity Survey unveiled that the cornerstone of the American dream, access to opportunity, is perceived by many to be increasingly out of reach. The survey found that across almost every demographic group and metric, Americans are more pessimistic than they were in two surveys conducted in 2021. The McKinsey Economic Opportunity Index, that's a scale that gauges Americans' perceptions of past, present, and future economic opportunity, showed a 5% decrease in optimism in the first quarter of 2022 compared with a survey from 6 months ago and a 3% drop from a survey a year ago, the firm detailed. In both rural areas and cities, and across almost every demographic, income level, and age group, more respondents than last year believe America is doing a poor job of providing opportunities for all people. More people also say they have fewer economic opportunities than they did a year ago, and they expect there will be even fewer economic opportunities for themselves and the country in a year and 5 years from now.
It's all
Survey's
facts, man.
findings highlight.
The Lord already said it.
Even with wages going up, our paychecks are not rising at the same rate as everything else is.
Right.
Americans just don't feel poorer. They are poorer. In fact, they have never lost so much purchasing power in 1 year. Real disposable incomes, which are defined by how much is left after subtracting taxes and inflation, fell at a 7.8% annual rate in the first quarter of the year, the Bureau of Economic Analysis estimated on Wednesday. A drop of that magnitude is virtually unheard of outside of a recession. But wait, it gets worse. Real disposable incomes have fallen in each of the past 4 quarters, and we're down 12% from a year earlier as of the end of March.
I know this is going a little long. I had a lot of clips. But hey, this is prophecy, man. The Lord said this is going to happen. And for those that don't trust in this system, this doesn't bother you, man. When you trust in this system, this bothers you, man. And these devils know most of our people trust in the system. So this put fear in their heart, man. This terrifies a person, not knowing how they're gonna eat or when, how they're gonna get money for certain bills. Hey, the Lord said in Matthew 6, don't even worry about none of these things, man. Because it's the Lord that's doing it. And he's doing it to show 2/3 that they can't win, man. Showing the heathens that they will not win, man. No matter they create a new system or whatever, it is not going to work, man. But this is the Lord showing us, man, that don't trust in the system, that have weaned ourselves off the system. Hey, the Lord said you're going to laugh at destruction and death and famine, man.
Decline that shattered the pre-pandemic record of minus 2.6% set in 1974. Meanwhile, the taxes we paid have risen by $500 billion, rising to 14.4% of personal income in the first quarter, just a tick off the record of 14.5% seen in 2001. If that's not what a recession looks like, then nothing else is. But still, hey, policymakers and political leaders keep telling us that we are not in a recession. We have nothing to worry about. At this point, even the CEO of Bank of America is saying that the official definition of inflation doesn't matter. What families are experiencing every day does. Brian Moynihan told the Associated Press that the recent debate over whether the U.S. economy is technically in a recession or not is missing the point. What matters is that current economic conditions are negatively impacting those who are most vulnerable. Recession is a word. Whether we are in a recession or not is really not the important thing. It's what it feels like for the people going through this, he emphasized. And it feels nerve-wracking to know we're doing our best, working extremely hard, and that's still not enough to get by and live a comfortable life. Sadly, this is about as good as things are gonna get. A new economic downturn is on our doorsteps. Layoff announcements at major firms are running 24%.
You see that? U.S. head for massive layoffs. Ecclesiastes 12:3. In the day when the keepers of the house shall tremble, and the strong men shall bow themselves, and the grinders cease because they are few. The grinders are the jobs, the employers. And the grinders cease because they are few, and those that look out of the windows shall be darkened. And those that look out of the windows be darkened. And the doors shall be shut in the streets when the sound of the grinding is low. No work, man. No work. You see it? U.S. heads for massive layoffs. And he shall rise up at the voice of the bird. Who? Him that have no assurance of life, man. Him that don't have no money. Can't take care of his family. Can't feed his kids. Don't know what he gonna do. And he shall rise up at the voice of the bird. And all the doors of music shall be brought low. And what we listen to right now, a bunch of garbage music, man. All the music we listen to right now is garbage. So this is the daughters of music being brought low, man. Prophecies, man.
And higher this year than they were last year. The
gonna
America
get
that
worse.
most of us grew up in is dying. And what we have seen so far is just the beginning of its collapse. Our leaders will continue with business as usual.
Right.
They will just keep
Right,
doing
because
this.
when famine hit, it ain't gonna be no food for everybody. It ain't gonna be no food for them that's on the bottom, man. Okay? For the 2/3 of our people and these heathens, it ain't gonna be no food for them, man. But guess what? The whole flock of Israel gonna eat, just like the elites of Edomites gonna eat, man. But everybody in the middle, 2/3 of Jake, heathens, they ain't gonna have nothing to eat, man. Because it's not gonna be a famine for you that's on the bottom, man.
The same things over and over again and foolishly expecting different results. Whatever they're doing to fix things is not going to work.
See what he said? Biden just said it is no inflation. Hey, they got money, man. When you got money, whatever happens, man, you good. It ain't affecting you. He don't gotta pay taxes. Of course, ain't no inflation in his pocket.
and that's crystal clear to everyone by now. We must start valuing working families again, and that means giving them opportunities to improve their financial situations and encouraging the creation of good paying jobs. Unfortunately, we have already entered the early stages of the next great economic crisis. And so things are going to get a whole lot worse for the working class before there is any chance of them getting better.
You're right. It is no future for Babylon the Great, man. It is no future, man. So I got two more clips. Two more clips here. This is what's going on, man. The world of Babylon is through, man. Let me play this.
The horror of breadlines is back in America. Food banks all over the country are being overwhelmed by a massive surge in demand as the cost of living crisis continues to push more people into poverty. Food lines are getting increasingly longer as prices of everyday necessities rise much faster than people's incomes. Even though authorities say that inflation is easing, for millions of hard-working Americans out there, it certainly doesn't feel that way. The price of most of the goods we buy and consume on a daily basis is going up at a much brisker pace than official inflation numbers suggest, and people from all over the U.S. are seeing their lifestyles be absolutely eviscerated by soaring living expenses. That's why an increasing number of them are turning to food banks. The bad news is that many charities are starting to send people away or closing doors altogether because they don't have enough supplies for everyone. That's what we're going to expose today. But before moving on, please give us your support with a thumbs up in this video and subscribe to our channel to always stay updated with the latest news. From coast to coast, demand for food assistance is rapidly growing. Even in rural locations such as northwest Montana, food banks are witnessing an unprecedented surge in the number of families in need of help. In the Flathead region, pantries are struggling with emptier shelves and scarcer donations while demand for their services continues to rise. Our numbers have definitely been increasing, and Boomer, co-manager of the Columbia Falls Food Bank, said, "There's been an influx of people and a shortage of supplies." According to Boomer, the food bank is now overwhelmed by the level of demand it is experiencing. But the problem of stressed and understocked pantries is not unique to Montana. Unfortunately, the same thing can be said for numerous other facilities across the country. With food and gas prices skyrocketing, Americans are being forced to pinch pennies and limit purchases. In August, grocery prices increased 10.8% compared to a year ago. And while bills are getting higher, lines at food banks are getting longer. Flathead Food Bank Executive Director Jamie Quinn noted that more and more families are facing hardships to put meals on the table. She said, "Inflation is hurting everybody. We've seen a decrease in our donations, in our drives, and in our grocery rescue. When there's less on the shelves, there's less for us to rescue." In the past few months, the food bank has seen price increases on almost every grocery staple, from a 16% increase on jelly to a 93% jump on macaroni and cheese. We can do our best right.
This is Sandra Butler. I paid Sandra $10,000 for finding an ugly house near her hometown and
right now. But if things really get bad, how do we compete for the same limited food supply, Quinn says. To protect themselves from worsening inflationary pressures, the Flathead Food Bank is stocking up for new customers. Quinn reveals that right now the goal is to buy early and in bulk, knowing that it's probably gonna get worse. Food is a lot more than just somebody being able to eat, Quinn explained, stressing the importance of meal stability in everyday life. You see this trickle effect that once someone's hunger security is threatened, so much more in their life is at risk. In the region, the minimum wage recently rose 45 cents to $9.20 an hour, a development that initially seemed promising for local residents. But Quinn says this has only put further pressure on local food banks, though, as higher wages have made many workers ineligible for much-needed welfare benefits. The increased wages are still not livable, she argued, as they have failed to keep up with inflation and skyrocketing housing costs. Meanwhile, millions of families are falling into poverty and seeing their lives turned upside down. Middle-class households that used to enjoy comfortable living standards are seeing the value of their money steadily shrink, while the cost of maintaining their lifestyles keeps going up. Many people that never visited a food bank before are now finding themselves in situations of food insecurity. Thomasina John is one of them. She was among the hundreds of families that lined up in several lanes of cars that went around the block last weekend outside St. Mary's Food Bank in Phoenix. John said her family had never visited a food bank before because her husband had easily supported her and their 4 children with his construction work. But it's really impossible to get by now without some help, she emphasized, saying she had traveled with a neighbor to share gas costs as they idled under a scorching desert sun. The prices are way too high. Similarly, Jesus Pasquale, who was also in the queue, said he has had to spend several $100s more every month to afford groceries for himself, his wife, and their 5 children, aged 11 to 19. He lamented, "It's a real struggle." The same scene is being repeated all over the nation, where food bank workers expect some rough months ahead. It does not look like it's going to get better overnight, said Katie Fitzgerald, President and Chief Operating Officer for the National Food Bank Network, Feeding America. She says, demand is really making the supply challenges complex. The Phoenix Food Bank's main distribution center has seen a 78% increase in demand compared to the same time last year, according to St. Mary's spokesman Jerry Brown. More than 900 families line up at the distribution center every weekend for an emergency government food box stuffed with goods such as canned beans, peanut butter, and rice, he revealed. A lot of these are people who are working and did okay during the pandemic and maybe even saw their wages going up, said Michael Flood, CEO of the Los Angeles Regional Food Bank. But they've also seen food prices go up beyond their budgets. In North Carolina, the marketing director of the Alameda County Community Food Bank, Michael Altfest, noted that as many as 10% of the people now seeking food are first-timers, and a growing number are showing up on foot rather than in cars to save gas. The food they get from us is helping them save already stretched budgets for other expenses, like gas, rent, diapers, and baby formula, he detailed. Sadly, higher costs and supply chain constraints are forcing dozens of U.S. food banks to either shut down or reduce services at a time when they're needed the most.
This is Leviticus 26 and 26. This in the NLT. I will destroy your food supply so that 10 women would need only 1 oven to bake bread for their families. They will ration your food by weight, and though you have food to eat, ye will not be satisfied.
Recent reports describe that food shortages and grocery inflation led several charitable nonprofits to shutter, temporarily close, or reduce their services. This spring, Nashville's Little Pantry closed down after 5 years of operation. New Jersey's Angels Unity Outreach announced a temporary closure due to supply shortages, and Utah's Too Early Food Pantry canceled an important food drive because of staffing and logistical issues. And among the food banks that remain open, many of them are putting limitations on how often people can visit and how much food they can get. It's sad to think that so many of the
This is Ezekiel chapter 4, verse 16 in the NLT. Then he told me, Son of man, I will make food very scarce in Jerusalem. It will be weighed out with great care and eaten fearfully. So these food banks, they say, I will make food very scarce in Jerusalem. It will be weighed out with great care. It's being weighed out. These food banks giving food out. It's being weighed out. It will be weighed out with great care and eaten fearfully. The water will be rationed out drop by drop, and the people will drink it with dismay, lacking food and water. People will look at one another in terror, and they will waste away under their punishment. This is the conditions for 2/3 of Jake, man.
these all-important charities are already experiencing such high levels of financial stress. Our economic downturn has only just begun, and conditions are likely to deteriorate much further from here. According to Caitlin Welsh, director of the Global Food Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, geopolitical events on the other side of the globe continue to impact America's food supply chain. Although the U.S. produces the majority of what it consumes, there are a number of ways that the ripple effects of the Ukraine crisis are impacting our domestic agriculture.
So you see, that's your food being rationed out, man. Hey, this happening. The Lord don't care about the heathens, man. This is happening to 2/3 of Jake, man. And I got this one clip here. I ain't gonna finish all of that. I'm gonna play this. So this was sent to me about a week ago. This in China. Let's see, according to media reports, China has locked down at least 33 cities affected. So let's play it here.
According to media reports, China has locked down at least 33 cities, affecting more than 65 million people. Prolonged and repeated lockdowns have left the public frustrated. The Aolong community in Longfeng District, Daqing City, has been closed for 2 weeks. Residents have run out of food. Many people in Daqing, Heilongjiang province, took to the streets to protest. They are demanding that authorities distribute supplies. Police arrived at the scene to quell the demonstration. People said that they had nothing left to eat, and the government didn't care about it. The police arrested some protesters, sparking public outrage. Shenzhen locked down at least 8 districts, affecting 11 million people, accounting for 90% of Shenzhen's population. Citizens have to wait in long lines to get nucleic acid tests. Many residents said they had to line up for 3 hours. Large numbers of people have to quarantine at night. Shenzhen is like a dead city. Public discontent is nearing a boiling point over the city's lockdown. A resident said, secretly weld iron bars at night, check nucleic acids, all negative. All roads are blocked in the early morning.
What is this? What is this? What is this called, man? You should try to enter into the city. You should not be able, man. This is martial law going on right here in these 33 cities, man. In martial law, man. Now, how real it is, hey, we don't know. But if this is real, hey, this is going to come to Babylon the Great, man. Let's run it back. Hey, conditioned through gradualism, man.
According to media reports, China has locked down at least 33 cities, affecting more than 65 million people. Prolonged and repeated lockdowns have left the public frustrated. The Aolong community in Longfeng District, Daqing City, has been closed for 2 weeks. Residents have run out of food. Many people in Daqing, Heilongjiang province, took to the streets to protest. They are demanding that authorities distribute supplies. Police arrived at the scene to quell the demonstration. People said that they had nothing left to eat, and the government didn't care about it. The police arrested some protesters, sparking public outrage. Shenzhen locked down at least 8 districts, affecting 11 million people, accounting for 90% of Shenzhen's population. Citizens have to wait in long lines to get nucleic acid tests. Many residents said they had to line up for 3 hours. Large numbers of people have to quarantine at night. Shenzhen is like a dead city. Public discontent is nearing a boiling point over the city's lockdown. A resident said, secretly weld iron bars at night, check nucleic acids, all negative. All roads are blocked in the early morning. A netizen said that he saw that the fence was pulled up a few meters nearby. These days are really exhausting physically and mentally, and he can't see an end. Likewise, Chengdu, Shijiazhuang, Harbin, Guiyang, Tianjin, and other cities have also been closed for many days because of the pandemic.
Martial law, man. Martial law, man. So you see, let me get a couple. I'm gonna read one more precept and I'm gonna close out. So you see, there is no hope. There is no future for Babylon the Great, man. This is Ezekiel chapter 5 and verse 16. It reads, when I shall send upon them the evil arrows of famine, which shall be for their destruction, and which I will send to destroy you, and I will increase the famine upon you, and I will break your staff of bread. So I will send upon you famine and evil beasts, and they shall bereave thee, and pestilence and blood shall pass through thee, and I will bring the sword upon thee. I, Yahweh, Bahashim Yahushai, have spoken it. One more here in Isaiah 3. It's Isaiah 3 and 1. For behold, the Lord, Yahweh Shem Yahushai, host, do take away from Jerusalem and from Judah the stay and the staff, the whole stay of bread, and the whole stay of water. You see? And these are all conditionings, man. Conditionings. Because Yahweh Shema Shah said 2/3 will not repent. So, hey, he said he's gonna, like in Jeremiah 30, the Lord say, he wounded us with the wound of an enemy, man. But the only ones get to wake up and come out of it is the hopeful elect. But 2/3, there is no future, man. There is no hope for 2/3 on this side. Babylon the Great gonna be destroyed, man. And it's gonna be through famine and pestilence, man. Concentration camps, sedition, neighbor against neighbor. This is going on, man. The MOTB is here, man. So Lord was edifying. I gotta give all praise and glory to Yahweh, Bahashim Yahushai, Bahashim Rikah Kodash. The bonus to the apostles and elder bishops and elders of great millstone rule well, who teach well, who are the apostles and elders of all Israel, ready to construct or not. And the sincere salutation to all the Akim, pushing this truth and believing this truth throughout the four winds of the earth and the entire world, waiting on the hopeful elect. And shalom to the walk through our listening and learning. You for sisters who are listening and learning, always edifying. The next time I say shalom, walk about to opportunity in. May Yahweh Shema shall continue to bless you in your houses, stay prayed up. And to that brother, Israel East, just come on the comment board, brother, of this video, another video, and then I'll show you how you can link up with me. So, the water for tuning in. May Yahweh Shema shall continue to bless you in your houses. Stay prayed up. The water for your precepts. Shalom. Wah, Baba Ball.